Alrighty, Dream Team, we're back. Another great lesson for you today. What we're looking at is the last step here, which is 6, the annotated bibliography requirements. I'm going to go over two things this tutorial for you. One is how to do footnoting, and then the second one is how to construct an annotated bibliography. So without further ado, let's get to it. Now this, again with your scaffold sheet, this is also in your big brain book, so you can use that if you would rather, because that way you've got this annotated for later on when we go to look at your PIP for year 12. However, you can use it on this sheet, it's whatever, but big brain book's probably the better way to go. So how do we footnote? There are technically lots of different ways of footnoting, but in terms of the most simple cutthroat way to do it is I'm going to show you today. So basically footnotes look like this. There'll be this little number after a sentence, and then that number will correspond with a source here, and the idea is that you put a footnote at the end of a sentence to acknowledge that the information used to construct that idea came from this particular place. Okay, this is not to say that the sentence you have written is not your own idea. I know some people were like, I don't want to footnote this because I did all this analysis of this data, it's going to come across like I didn't do anything. That's not the case at all. It's actually the opposite. It's very clear when someone has come up and done a lot of analysis with their idea, but the idea is that the footnote still needs to be there because it's showing that you've referred to data, and that's a good thing. That means your research is legitimate. That means you've done your homework, you've done your background checks. Your judgments that you make are then informed. Okay, we know that to get in the A criteria we need to make informed judgments. If you don't have research backing them, you're just making judgments. Okay, need to have these footnotes in place. Don't feel like it weakens your idea. If I see like 15 footnotes on a page, I get really excited as a marker, quite genuinely, right? If I see 2, I get a bit sad. Okay, so make sure, right, that there's lots of footnotes on those pages. Okay, so in terms of how to make a footnote, it's very simple. I'll get a Google Doc up here. So let's say we write the most factual statement known to me, if we can spell. Okay, now I'm pretty sure this is American. Yeah, I'm not going to spell favorite incorrectly, thank you. Alright, so Mr. Brown is my favorite teacher, right? Let's say that is a valid piece of research. There's a lot of analysis going into that statement, and you want to footnote it. So what you do in your Google Docs, okay, is you do the following. File, no, let me retry. Okay, insert, footnote. There is a keyboard shortcut, Control-Alt-F, if you want to make it a lot faster. But you go insert, footnote, and you've got to make sure that the little dot repeater thing that we can see here is where it needs to be. Now it needs to go after the full stop, okay? Not before it, but after the full stop, okay? Don't do a space and then put it straight away after the full stop. Okay, so let's say I've written this sentence, I hit full stop, it's in the right position. Okay, we then go insert, footnote, and you'll see the page will move straight down to the bottom. Okay, if we scroll back up, we can see this little number 1 here. I'll zoom in for those that need a bit of visual assistance. We can see this little 1 here, and if we scroll right down to the bottom, we can see the 1 there, and the footnote's ready to go. Okay, so we now need to reference that. Now the reference is going to look different depending on the reference system you use. And now I want to tell you, it doesn't matter what reference system you use as long as you use the same one so that it's consistent throughout your report. Okay, I'll just finish this footnote off quickly. Okay, let's say Brisbane Water Secondary College concurs with that statement. Okay, so what we'll then do is you'd actually put the legit source in there, but I'll get to that in a second. So that's like, I guess, the mechanics of how to do a footnote, right? So the first time a reference occurs in a footnote, you should write it in full. Okay, so according to research conducted at BWSC, 99% of students listed Mr. Brown as their favourite teacher. Okay, And we can see that the source for that is Simon Warren 2020, where he wrote an article called Mr. Brown, the Man, the Myth, the Legend. Okay, and our publisher was Brisbane Secondary College. Okay, so that's our first note. Note that in footnotes the author's first name comes before the surname. Also note that the footnote number always occurs after any punctuation marks, such as this if it's a comma, so see the comma, it's come after the comma, and like this if it's after a full stop. Okay, footnote can occur in the middle of a sentence, and if it does, it doesn't really matter where it's inserted. Okay, so let's say you have like 3 or 4 ideas in your sentence. You don't have to put like footnote 4, 5, and 6 right at the end of the sentence. Let's say this is one idea, you put the footnote there after the word occurs. Let's say you've listed a second idea, you put it there after the word sentence, and the third idea, you put it right at the end of the sentence. Okay, so it doesn't really matter where, if it's in the middle and you're doing multiple things, but if you're only referring to the one thing, just whack it in at the end of the sentence. Okay, so that's what you'll do and how to footnote. If you want, I'll show you or not if you want, I'll actually show you. So what it will look like is this. So you can use a website such as Cite This For Me and it will pump this out for you, or you can write it manually. Okay, so there's a couple of ways you can do it. Typically, a standard way is that you put the author's name first, followed by the year it was published, then the title, and then the publisher. That's the typical standard way of doing a footnote. It doesn't have to be that way because there's a lot of different systems, but whatever system you use, just make sure that you stick to it. So if you're wanting to do a manual citation, you can do it in that way. Let's get a newspaper article up as an example. Alright, so I've got an article here. Ski workers are leaving Victoria Alpine Resorts. Okay, ski workers are leaving the snow. Okay, that's my statement. I'm going to footnote it. Control-Alt-F, there's my footnote. Now, I want to use this as my source, right? So if I start with the author first, I'm going to show you the manual and then the automated way you can do it. So the manual way is this article's, I want the author, it's by Anna Chisholm. Alright, so here I'm going to write Anna Chisholm. Okay, comma, what year was this published in? It was updated 3 hours ago and posted 10 hours ago, so that was published in 2023, so I'm going to write 2023 here. Now the title of the article is this, so I'm going to whack her in just there, and then I'm going to make that an appropriate font size. Ski season accommodation shortage leads to blah 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 in workers. Okay, I then need the publisher, which is ABC News. So here I will write ABC News Australia. Okay, done. That's it. That's your footnote. Short, sharp, sweet, complete. If you wanted to do this, and I would suggest that you do this because you're going to have to footnote a lot of things, is you can use a website called Cite This For Me. Okay, so if I go to that website now there are a billion different site generators that you can use. This is just the one I like. There's heaps of them, so you can just Google them if you want. Okay, so you just click that, you say what you want to do. I want to do a website. Now you can just chuck the URL in, but it doesn't always fill out everything, so you still got to check. So you pop the URL in, hit search, and then it starts searching the resource for you, and then you get a very brief citation. So if I hit cite here, you get this information here. You'll then hit the continue button, and then it's got all the info here for you. So you can change it if any of it's wrong, okay, if you wanted to, or you can add different things. Like, let's say it told me the publisher was like Robert Brown, and I know that's wrong. I can just delete that there, okay? But it gives you this idea that you can see most of the information here. What you'll then do is hit complete citation there at the bottom, and there voila, you have your citation. So you just go copy citation, now it's copied to you, and then you go to your footnote and you paste it in, and it's done. Okay, now it looks a bit cooler than mine did. Okay, so if you just do that and use that for all of your citations, that's the best way to go. What you then do is, once you've written that and you need to put it in your annotated bibliography, you would cut and paste that, and then you just paste it here, and then you proceed to write your annotation below it, okay, which I'm going to get to now. Okay, so that's how you footnote. I hope that covered all the questions and the basis of that. So that's how to footnote. Annotated bibliography. Let's have a look at how we do that. So the really cool thing is we've almost put the 3 key things that you need here. This is a summarized version. I'll show you a more in detail version if you like. But on your template, you have this as a guide. So the first thing you want to do is summarize the findings of your source in a sentence or 2. You then want to analyze and assess the source itself. So this is where you evaluate the source, okay? Is it biased, is it subjective, is it objective, etc. This is where, if we look back at the marking criteria and we make a scroll down to here, makes informed judgments on the usefulness, validity and bias of information. That's what we're doing here, okay? That's what you're doing in this analysis section. You will then create a little summary statement here. So reflect on the usefulness of your source. So this is like, I guess, a really condensed version. If you're wanting something that's probably a bit better, and I would encourage you guys to use this one, it's this beautiful one. So again, this is on in your Big Brain book as well. It's a more, I guess, detailed version of an annotation, and I think it's one I would encourage you to use more so than this one. This is just a quick recap guide, but this one's much better. So when we look here, we've got primary research methods and secondary research methods. So when you create your annotated bibliography, you want to have, I guess, 2 subheadings to start with. Okay, the first one is primary research, and then the second one is secondary research. Okay, so all your primary research annotations go under here. So that's you creating annotations for your questionnaire and your interview and any other primary research that you've used. And then your secondary research annotations come below here, okay? And you want to alphabetize them, okay? So here your interview will come first, then your questionnaire. If you did a content analysis, that will come first, etc. You then will put this in alphabetical order via the author's last name, or so whatever system you're using. If you're using it consistently, you just put it in alphabetical order, okay? So that's that. Here's what you actually do in your annotation, and this is something that I would recommend you cut when you go to do your annotations, is you cut and paste this guide and almost like answer the questions, right? So we'd cut this, we'd paste it here, or you might want to create a neater version, and then you just go through here and answer. So elaborate on the source. What information did this provide you with? You might say, this source provided important information on my contemporary issue, specifically when it examined blah 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 blah. Okay, so you sort of ask these questions. So you tell me and elaborate on the details of the source. So what information did it provide you with? Which section did you reference it, or was it particularly relevant for? So what about your contemporary issue was this piece of research particularly relevant for? It might be something like it provided really strong quantitative data showing change over time in the perspectives relating to the death penalty, for example. You then want to comment, and this is the bit where you pull most of your marks. So you really got to make sure this step is done really well, and this is why it's so big. You got to comment on its reliability, validity, and bias. Okay, as we know in our marking criteria, usefulness, validity, and bias. So here you're almost talking about how it was useful, okay? And here you're talking about the validity and bias elements. So did this contain bias? If so, what? So you might say this research article contained limited bias as it was written by 3 academic doctorates who specialized in the death penalty. I don't know. So therefore it's got limited bias. You would never say something has no bias, because that's typically not true. That's where limited is really good, because it's really minutiae. Obviously everything has some kind of level of bias or degree of bias to it. So you'd say something like it has a limited bias, it has substantial bias, whatever it is. Sometimes it's good also to consider how you negated bias. So let's say, for example, you used a source and it was biased. Let's say you write, this source was partially biased because it was an opinion piece written by a politician, for example. However, I was able to synthesize it with my primary data and other secondary research, which made me deem that this article was valid as an opinion. When you're particularly annotating your primary research as well, it's also, or even your secondary research, it's also a good idea to highlight how you conducted this ethically as well, because that makes your research more valid because you've done it ethically. So you might say something like, I ensured that I informed participants of questions asked in my interview prior to asking them, making sure they were comfortable with the sensitive nature of my topic, blah, 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 blah. Then the last thing you want to talk about is it a valid source or is it reliable? These are the other things you want to sort of consider. So these are almost like questions or prompts you can ask yourself. Is it a reputable publisher? So if I look at this article, which technically has nothing to do with a contemporary issue, ABC News is typically considered a reputable publisher. Okay, it's an independent government organization and news source, right? So we could say, as published by the ABC News, I deemed this a reliable source as it was written by a trusted institution and an experienced journalist. Boom. Does the article itself provide references? That's another good way to look at it. So you can look at a piece of writing. So say if you look at an academic journal article and that journal article itself has like 70 footnotes, you can say something like, to further increase its validity, this research paper had over 70 citations relating to other studies, therefore I deemed it quite valid and reliable. Does it synthesize with other research? So you can say, you know, this synthesized with my primary data with this other source, so therefore it was even more reliable. And then the other thing is you can talk about is if it's ethical or not too. So there's lots of different ways I guess you can say this. And if I'll look at some examples here below that you can see, it's just straight below here. So we've got examples of primary annotations and then some sample secondary ones. So let's have a read of a few and see if we can break it down. So let's go with an interview because we were just talking about that. So this interview was conducted on an Indigenous female aged 17 to gain a micro perspective on the rehabilitation necessary for Indigenous youth after incarceration. We've even put in concepts in our annotations. Love that. So again, what information? They're elaborating on the details of the source. What information did it provide us with? This was highly, so that's the first sentence. The second sentence is, why was it useful? This was a highly informative as it provided insight into a perspective of the future and potential solutions to redress social exclusion of Aboriginal youth from a First Nations perspective. Okay, so they've elaborated on the details of the source, which is great. Further, it was useful when examining, so you want to use these words, okay? Use these 3 words, useful, valid, bias. Just use them because they're the wording in the marking criteria, and it's really important that you use that in your responses as well and in your annotations. Okay, so use those words. Further, it was useful when examining the rehabilitation that Indigenous people believe is necessary in order to close the substantial gap between these 2 groups present in the justice system. This interview was exceedingly valid and reliable. So exceedingly, we are making an informed judgment, okay? Exceedingly valid and reliable as the information gathered was able to be synthesized with other primary and secondary sources. Despite this, it contained bias as it was solely an opinionated response to a series of interviews questions. So it's important to acknowledge bias where it's there. Some people go, oh, if I acknowledge it, are people going to think that my research isn't valid because I've literally said it's biased? The answer there is no. Okay, you're acknowledging it. That's showing that you're making an informed judgment on it. But the clever thing this person does is shows how, although it had bias, here's how I negated it. So you're showing that you're a good researcher. However, this bias was limited due to the fact that I implemented ethical research methods, such as maintaining the anonymity of the interviewee and asking a balanced set of questions. Moreover, I ensured the participant was informed of the content of my questions previous to the interview, adhering to ethical research practices, and also confirmed that my participant was comfortable. Okay, and that's using a lot of wording from the syllabus there too, so that's really valuable. So that's a pretty good annotation. Let's quickly do, and you'll find different examples. There's a questionnaire one here for you, a personal reflection, a participant observation. I've tried to give you guys different ones so you can see what they look like. An interview here, a content analysis here. Okay, so you've got a variety there. When we look at secondary annotations, there's a few here. So let's look at this one. So again, you cut and paste your citation as the heading and do something to make it stand out. So here it's been highlighted in blue. If you're looking at your, say, research paper, you can indent it by putting a little indent there, or you can make it a dot point. Whatever you do, just do something to indicate that that's the source, and then your annotation is separate from it. So let's look at this secondary one. This article communicates the opinion of Michael Kirby, who identifies as a homosexual and is a former judiciary. I partially utilised his opinion to synthesize other research that stipulated that homophobia is unlikely to dissipate within their next lifetime. However, Kirby also argues that the pertinacious nature, so that word means that someone is very affirmed in their opinion, of this social force is due to the unwillingness of many LGBT individuals to come out. So we've got an idea here of what the source is about. Then we start to shy away a little bit. Okay, so this particular example is one that I've put in because I want to show you how, not how not to do something, but how to I just wanted to give you an example that wasn't 100% good so that you can see why it's important that you follow this process. So we've got a bit of information here about what the source is about, but then we go into something like, I disagree with this because of this, additionally, and they talk about why they disagree with it, right? So we don't need that kind of opinion or detail. We want to just stick to talking about the source, okay? However, I agree that societal homophobia is relatively inexorable, and use Kirby's opinion. So we've finally got here where they've used it, okay? And then we have a problem here though, where it says Kirby's opinion carries limited bias. Someone's opinion is typically biased, right? So you've got to be careful of how you construct these, okay? We'll now look at a bit of a better one. So maybe with this one, just write a little what not to do next to this one. So we'll go up to the top one here. Again, we've got the citation here. This was a tremendously useful source which outlined the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This allowed me to understand the violations made by the juvenile justice system, which was useful in analysing meso-perspectives of my research topic. Okay, so we've got a bit of an idea of what the article was about, why it was useful. This was particularly valid and reliable as it was written and published by the Australian Human Rights Commission, which is a highly reputable source. I would probably only add here that it's a government source, which makes it seem more legit, but that's pretty good as it is. As a result of this, it also contained limited bias, as the human rights outlined were taken from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights itself. So here we've got a short, sharp, sweet annotation, which is saying what the source was used for, why it was useful, where's its validity, reliability, and talk about its bias as well. Okay, so that's kind of what you want to see. A little bit more fleshed out would be ideal, but that's a really short, sharp, sweet answer that you can see there. You can see that these ones are much more fleshed out, which is good, but that is basically in a nutshell how you write an annotated bibliography statement. Okay, so if you follow these kind of prompts and address usefulness, validity, and bias, you will be good. You'll be sweet. Okay, so making sure you do those things. Now, the thing with annotations is that I would recommend that you annotate as much as you can as you go. If you're leaving it, I guess, to the last minute, which is fine, if that's how we operate and that's how you want to work, that's fine. But just make sure that once you've written them, that you give yourself a day and then reread them, because the problem that people have, if you write your annotations all in one sitting, they start to read identical and they read the same. So you want to try, and if you write it as you go, it sort of prevents that happening. So you got to try and find ways to say the same thing a lot of different times, and that can be a bit annoying, but that's the challenge of annotated bibliographies, right? So you might want to start off with talking about reliability and bias and then move into the usefulness and stuff like that. So you could sort of flip the order a little bit. I'd probably always lead with what the information was about, but you might want to switch up the order of some of these that you do. Okay, you might want to talk about reliability and bias first and then talk about usefulness. Okay, but you got to find different ways to say the same thing, and I guess that's where looking at a few different examples can give you ideas on how to do that. But just be wary of that if you do write it in one sitting, that you want to try and not make them all sound identical and the same. Okay, alright, that's how to footnote and do an annotated bibliography. Thank you very much.